My name is Christina Liao. I lead the Global Research and Analytics team at Fleishman Hiller. And some of you may not know that prior to Fleishman Hiller, I lead the Research and Analytics team at the Coca-Cola Company, which is why Barry asked me to moderate this session, because it's about upping the game, what the client wants, and how to deliver it. And so I have perspective from both sides. And we also have 4 esteemed panelists here representing different industry sectors, as well as agency and client side mix. So you're going to hear great perspective from them. But what I'm really hoping is that we have good interaction with the audience, because ultimately, if we want to get to the same place, we all need to agree on in terms of some of the general directions that we're going and how we're going to get there. Okay, so I am going to, we have some prepared slides, and I'm going to do a brief introduction. But before I do that, I actually want to do a little bit warm up and ask each of you, if you think of keeping it simple, because that was why kind of we're all here, just shout it out, a couple words that come to your mind when the clients, or if you're on the agency side working with the client, what comes to mind when you need to keep things simple? What's simple to you in your mind?
Brief.
Brief, okay? What's that?
Visual data, images.
Images, visual data, images, great. Brief, visual data, anything else?
Understandable.
What's that?
Understandable.
Understandable.
Engaging.
Engaging.
Easy wording.
Easy wording. See, those are great for us to take in. All of you can be the panelists. Yeah. So, did I hear anything else? So we hear understandable, engaging, brief, visual data, easy to understand. So as you notice in all of those descriptors that you guys throw out, there are actually 2 aspects to keeping it simple. One is content, right? What do you include in any of the reports you deliver? And the second part is the delivery, how you deliver it, right? So one is the what, and the other one is the how. So those are the 2 aspects of keeping it simple. And so we'll keep that in mind, and you'll see some good examples and as well as bad examples that our panelists have put together, and they will speak to those, as well as having a conversation and dialogue with all of you, and see, are there consensus that we can get to in terms of what define keeping it simple? Okay, so we can bypass this. Keeping it simple. So I throw up these 2 lines, and it may be controversial, especially for the second part, right? So keeping it simple from a client perspective. So for example, at Coca-Cola, we have massive amount of data, okay? And when we talk about doing research, our audience is very, very complicated. So I'll give you one example. A lot of time, most industry sectors use consumer and customer interchangeably, right? So for us, consumer and customer has very distinct meaning. Consumers are the people, like the people in this room, that you actually consume the beverage, right? Customers are the retailers, right? So those are the Walmart or any of the grocery stores. So those are distinct target audience, but they also interact at some point, right? So, and then for us, the other target audience is shopper. So shopper are those who have purchase decision power, but their preference for the beverage may be different for the consumers in the household that they make the purchase for, right? So you see the interaction there. So because of that, we have massive amount of data. We also, on a daily basis, I get calls and emails and everything, which I'm sure some of our panelists experience, from all kinds of vendors, and saying that they have something unique. And some of them may be more visually appealing. Some of them, they have something unique to offer. So when they come in and do a pitch, as well as for our internal team to do that, one of the things to keep in mind in terms of keeping it simple is to be visually succinct and mentally verbose. And what do I mean by that? So don't be afraid to make bold and succinct statement, right? So it may be very brief to begin with, but you need to be prepared to show evidence, right? So you need to be mentally prepared for the evidence to come. So if you present a report and make 1 or 2 key recommendations, it's important to start with that, because that grabs people's attention, and that actually serves as the conversation starter which gives you the opportunity to get into the details, right? In terms of, if I make a recommendation and say, this is how you need to change your brand image or your positioning statement, it grabs people's attention, especially sometimes when it's a bold statement or you're asking a lot of money to be invested for a particular brand based on the analysis that you do. Then that actually starts the conversation going as to, well, why are you recommending that, right? What facts do you have? So that's what I meant by that in terms of being visually succinct, putting together the report. So I want to show some example here. So this is one of the projects that we do for an organization called the California Table Grape. And so this is a one-page view because this is a research study about the journey of a shopper in terms of when they're shopping for grapes, right? So when you present this, yes, you can see we have pre-purchase to purchase to post-purchase, right? So and at each stage, there are the shopper considerations as well as from a commission standpoint, what are the implications for communication for them when they take their insights into the consumers and the shoppers that we provide for them to take to the retailers, right? And we actually see, you may not be able to read the detailed quotes, but we put the quotes of the shoppers or the consumers we interview as a way to contextualize, to give it a more storytelling visual. So we put everything in one slide, and in fact, we put all of this on the members of the commissions. They each have a iPad. So we put this on the iPad, and then there's a dashboard here. So when we show this, it's not being meant to be the end. It actually meant to start because once they see that, and then for the commission, they can go into each of the stage, right, and say, why do you recommend this is how we need to communicate for the pre-purchase stage? And that gives us the opportunity to actually go in and start to talk about the details. And then this slide and the next one, this is actually taken at the CES event back in January in Las Vegas. CES is a huge event, right? So we're actually one of the sponsors here. So this is our monitoring station that we set up there. We have an in-house monitoring that we call the black box. So from this, what is shown here, these are all the different screens, right? So you think about the massive amount of data that coming through social media channels during the event, about the events, about all the different sessions that's going on. So when we get all this data, you can't just send reams of reports out, right, to the clients, or even when we tweet it out. So what we did is that I think all of you would be very familiar with the use of infographics, and someone earlier says about visual data. So here's an example of the visual data, right? So we summarize and highlight the major trends in one very simple graph, right? And actually from this one page, then you can click in each one of them, right, to get to that level of details, right? But you need to present it first in a way that at least people get to read it instead of being so intimidating with all the words and all the details in the data that you miss the main points because you're going to lose the audience before they even reach your content. So that's the goal. And I would say that in general, as researcher, sometimes it's harder for us to be succinct because we like to prove how we get to a certain point, right? We like to prove we're all buttoned up and we take this scientific approach, and a lot of those details for the client's perspective, especially when the higher level you get, they don't need that level of detail because the reason they hire you and to work with them is that they already trust the expertise that you bring to the table. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. And this one, I said 1, 2, 3, pack a punch and make an impact. So one of the way that at Coca-Cola, for example, in terms of our team working together, working through different vendors and working with different kinds of data coming from all different directions, in terms of, it's easy to say, okay, let's keep it simple and let's make it simple. But how do we get to that point? So this is one way for us to be very disciplined and be very focused. So we can start with one recommendation, right? So for each recommendation, what are the 2 supporting evidence or facts associated with that, right? And what are the 3 action items to follow? Now, it doesn't have to be exactly that number, but you have to have a starting point for you to really start focus and keep it succinct. Okay, so keep it simple means that keep it succinct, but at the same time, it needs to be meaningful. It doesn't mean a simplistic presentation of facts, right? You need to get to the point where the client can actually see, this is what you need me to do, right? This is your recommendation for me. And that goes, that's also true for if you're trying to get to the insight, for example, for a creative or a campaign or a program when you're working through all different types of data. So I actually want to show an example in terms of how we start with one trend, right? And from that trend, we look at the facts associated with the trend, and we actually ask some follow-up questions to actually come to the final succinct insights that lead to our ideas in terms of how to take that idea to full implementation. So this trend, I don't think anyone would disagree, right? I mean, I think it's been quoted so many times. So what do you do with that? And even when you're working on project in terms of from a measurement or what are the key aspects to capture. So from that, and this is for a telecom client in terms of, it's probably more common in the US in terms of teenager texting and driving at the same time. Most people here probably bike more, so I don't know how relevant. But so because of that trend that we noticed earlier, the fact is that response times to text are quickening, right? So teenagers in particular expect a real-time response, right, to anything, right? So the way for us to really go through all of the data that we have, that coming from so many different directions, is that we start with the trend and this fact, and we keep asking the question of why, right? So that leads us to, okay, why is that important? Because it's a conversation. Well, why is it important when it's a conversation? You need to do it in real time, right? So I'm not going to read through all of them, but moving all the way down to the end is because I'm one unanswered text away from being rejected. So teenager, if you follow them, you know that it's very important that they are liked by their friends, right? And they're the center of attention and everything, right? So from that, what we recognize is that silence equals rejection, right? So that's the insights coming out of that. And again, we take that approach and keep distilling down. So if silence equals rejection, what would be the recommendation? And that's this part. When we get to this part is when the creative, the art and the science come together when you're making recommendation, right? When you get to that final point. So here's our recommendation. Imagine if we could make silence cool. So by saying that, silence is not a bad thing. It's actually make you look cool, right? So in a way that you're trying to play it to the importance of being cool for teenagers, right? So that's how we get to that very, very succinct idea at the end. But there's a lot of work in the background, right? So it's not easy to, and it doesn't come very, very quickly. But it's a very disciplined approach for us to get there. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen. So she will not only provide some of her examples, she will actually provide a background in terms of why we are even here talking about these topics.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I think we are still just morning. So as I think some of you know, I'm the rookie, so I'm on my debut at my first Amec Summit. And so it is an absolute pleasure to be here. And I think I bring a relatively different perspective to this conversation. I came into this industry, just over a year ago to run our business, Mediaverse, in Australia, media analysis and evaluation agency. Prior to that, I was 25 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I know I don't look old enough to have done all of that, but I started at 14. And the last decade of my time at PwC as a partner there. And I think what I've realised after having left PwC is the phenomenal thinking and way of dealing with clients that you just learn. And you learn that sort of by osmosis over such a long period of time. But I think due to that, I am lucky enough to have been able to learn a bit of a skill about, what the client wants. Albeit in my consulting role there, it was a very different thing around, most of my clients didn't want to pay tax, those sorts of things. But therein lies the issue that there's an art and a craft in trying to educate your client and perhaps convince your client about what they actually want. So whilst we're talking about keep it simple and this concept of conciseness and reporting, it's the reporting, it's the infographics, it's all those sorts of things. I think the real secret sauce in keeping it simple and delivering what your client wants is way, way earlier than that. It's right back at the very, very start. And, it's pretty easy for us to talk about the motherhood statements of, understanding client needs and all those sorts of things. But I think that's actually the part that most of us don't do very well. So something that, has been rammed into my brain so hard over a few decades is about providing solutions and not selling products. And that's services, goods, whatever the thing is. And that's why I think when Chris Foster made reference yesterday, Chris from Booz Allen Hamilton, about the future of this industry and the future looking like maybe there are more, consultancy firms in the room. I agree with him completely. So Kelly, you can pass that comment on to Chris. He's not with us today. Because I think that's actually the skill that perhaps as media and comms evaluation professionals that, we really need to bring to the force. So I don't think Barry's in the room, but when Barry reached out and asked a few questions in setting up this session, and why this panel with clients is actually happening, because I suppose I had maybe not quite a clear expectation of what would actually happen at this summit. And, the comment I made to Barry is, I hope we're not just going to get together as sort of peers and talk to each other about how good a job we're doing. I hope we have clients telling us, probably we're not doing a great job, and what else can we be doing? So I hope that might actually happen. I wanted to also, look, I've got 2 slides you can click through for me. There we are. Thank you. I wanted to also just really briefly share some personal reflections or observations, thought processes I've gone through over the last 12 months, which started with absolute initial shock when I first came into this industry. And, I've come from the most highly regulated industry I think you can imagine, with, tax law that is different in every country, or even states of countries, and accounting standards and everything you can imagine through finance and business, to none. And I'm still coming to grips with that, actually. No regulation. With clients in the room, no accreditation, no nothing. And that sort of led me into intrigue, and heard about these Barcelona principles. So I thought, that's going to be magic. That's going to be fabulous. I've got to get my head right around all this. Oh, well, that didn't take very long, because I realised they're just, these guideposts, and, the standards. Let me get these standards. I'm going to learn these standards. But we don't have standards, in the literal sense. But that's when I realised that's our opportunity. Why are we making it hard? Why are we all searching around for some magic solution and some number, and we want to put a dollar value on it? Because that's actually our opportunity. We have no constraints. That's how we get to meet our client needs. That's where the magic really sits. So, as I said, it's a pretty obvious statement to talk about what the client wants. So that's our challenge. How do we figure out what these guys want? They don't often know themselves. So most of us in the room will have had that situation of going through, we want to scope out, we want to put forward a proposal, but we've got too many competing needs. We've got too many clients within one client. What does the executive team need? What does corporate comms team need? So it's sort of the journey of figuring out what is the scope of this? What are the business objectives? We talk about that. But are we really, really understanding what the business objectives are? How that links through to strategy? That's how we're going to be able to keep it simple. Because if we're not meeting and making that link, we might be putting up beautiful looking infographics, but that's not actually meeting the business needs or keeping it simple in the client's perspective. So that's the skill, and that's the co-creation of the end product. Our job is we've got to lead our clients on that journey. Not wait to be told, not wait to be, here's the brief, here's the scope of work, here's what we can do. So I'm going to, before we move on, I'm going to just show you an example of a page from a report. And it's actually one of ours. Doesn't look like our other reports. So Kate Satterfield, our client relations manager, sitting over here trying to hide a face because she doesn't want to put a name to this report. Good or bad example? Anybody love it, or does everybody hate it? So it's obviously my bad example. I still can't understand it, actually. I have taken out my friends that are in the room from Australia, which are, quite a few, might have a go at trying to guess it, but I've sort of tried to desensitise that a little bit. But the funny thing about this page, and why it's just visually so bad and so busy and takes so much time to try and figure it out, here's the funny bit. This is also my good example, because our client loves this page. It's crazy. Even funnier is we're so embarrassed about this, and this page and the other pages in this report that are sort of a bit similar. And so under Kate's fabulous leadership, we spent a lot of time and re-engineered this entire report, and we were so proud, and it looked amazing. Gave it to the client, and they said, thank you so much. That looks lovely. A couple of days later, came back and said, thanks for your work. We really appreciate it. Can you give us the old ones back? It's like, we understand this in our business. We want that back. They got that back. So you can sort of stand on this line that I sometimes sit on and think, oh my God, no, we want to be proud of our reporting. This is something that, we hold ourselves up. We get into intellectual debate about how fabulous it is, but it's not meeting their needs. And this did. We are on a journey with them. We haven't given up, and it has been slightly modified since that was end of 2013, that page, and has evolved a little bit, but it is a bit of a journey. So I will leave my comments for now at that, and I'm handing over back to Christina. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I think what Karen actually presented raised a point, and I want everyone to keep in mind while I'm getting Rod to come back, which is that idea around good or bad relativity, right? So I think part of the question is that are there things or aspects that there is actually absolute good or bad, right? Or is everything always relative? Because if everything is always relative, it's very difficult to get to a standards, right, that everyone can agree on. So if you can keep that in mind. And I recognize that as a moderator, I say all the four panelists, I failed to say who they are, which company or agency they work with. So Karen already introduced herself as the CEO for the Media Vest from Australia. So our next speaker is Ross Stratton. You're the Director of Social Media Intelligence with Lenovo. So Rod.
I think I managed to bore most people in the room yesterday, so I'm going to keep this short. I thought we were going to do a panel, so I'm a little unprepared on this, so I'm really going to be speaking off the cuff. I thought it was interesting, Karen, that you put that chart up, and I see it still on screen here. I've got no idea. Sorry.
I'm just going to advance it. So.
Oh, okay. I was quite happy keeping that slide there. Partly because I'm not Cindy. I noticed that I was the token male as well. I wouldn't know what to do with that slide. I wouldn't know what to do with that slide at all. And I think that's part of the problem that we have with a lot of the presentations that we get from companies coming in to say, we can do this. And I think it was said earlier on, there's a lot of companies in the room, and I don't mean this in any disrespectful way. I've been on that side of the fence. There's a lot of companies in the room who do the same kind of thing, but we're different from those other guys. And I think the bit that I find is missing a lot of the time is, and I'm not sure if you used the word just now, Christina, is relevance. Is actually relevance. And you talked about what does simplicity mean this morning. You asked that question. I think the other part is what is relevance and what's relevant to us as a client. I think there's an onus on us as a client to be open, because you're coming in the room and you're trying to sell the client on something. You're trying to get them interested in what you know about them. Well, you only know as much about them as is publicly available. You don't know anything about them if they haven't actually shared anything. And I know from when I used to sit and take briefs on the agency side, and you'd be asking 101 questions, and the client would say, well, I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that. That's actually confidential. But can you come back and answer the question that I've got based on the confidential information that I'm not going to share? We try, and a lot of us within the Lenovo team are all ex-agency. So we try and share as much as we possibly can, apart from the stuff that's confidential, to try and make it that the response that you're going to come back with is relevant. And the key within all the presentations that we see, I sit there through countless presentations, and I sit at the end of it and say, so what do I do with it? What do I do next? Because I see an awful lot of data being presented, and I'll be honest, I've got no idea what to do with it. Now, I don't know if that's the job of the consultant to tell me what I can do with it, because they're just telling me something. Here's an insight. Well, I remember years ago working with GlaxoSmithKline when we were their agency at Grey, and it was a French guy. I won't try and do the accent, but it was a French guy who ran it for the region. He ran the business for GSK for the region. And our creative director, who was this old Australian guy, absolutely brilliant, should have been a strat planner. And he turned around to him and he said, all the way through this presentation, you've talked about insights. You keep talking about insights. I want to know 3 things. What are insights? Where do I find them? And how much do they cost? Well, that wasn't the funny part. And this guy, he'd been around in the industry a long time, took it all in his stride, and he said, insights. He said, well, insights are a customer truth that you didn't know. And he said, and that's what we can bring to the table. Where do you find them? He said, you find them by going asking your kids, your next door neighbor, the guy that serves in the shop, and the woman who brings you your dinner at night. He said, and how much do they cost? They're free. They're free. I think we charged him for that piece of advice, but he said they were free. And I think that's the bit that as clients we're often missing is, what is the real insight? You're giving me information. And I don't know if anybody was in the room for the AP presentation earlier on in China by Sam Fleming from CIC. Absolutely brilliant. And I think if you probed further with Sam, and I know some people are trying to grab him afterwards, if you probed further with Sam, I think he would give you genuine insights. He gave us an awful lot of information. I wanted to know, what are the insights? So what do I do with it? Because the part that we face internally as clients in presenting to our C-suite is, what impact has this got on the business? So you've told me how many likes we've got. You've told me how many shares. You've told me the virality of the content. So what? What's the impact on the business? And I think that's the bit that we struggle with. I've got a couple of examples, and so if you can click through. All right, was a good report, actionable, relevant, as we said, clean and concise. I think we're saying all the same things, but Einstein, great comment, great quote. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And I think that we try and keep this in mind when we're presenting back to our CMO, because I know that he's going to ask the most difficult possible questions. So we tend to prep within the room and try and ask each other the most difficult questions and make them as stupid as possible, which usually works for our CMO when he asks us questions later on. So we try and understand it well enough. But I put the question that you asked me, which was, can you show us some simple reports? Well, flash them up. Thanks, Christina. I asked our Global Analytics Hub, can you show me some examples of what you describe as good reports? And I'm going to put this out to everybody in the audience. Is this a good report or not? So hands up for who thinks it's a good report. Interesting. Hands up who thinks it's bad. Hands up who thinks you can't answer that because you don't know the relevance. Brilliant. Okay. Point proven. I think there's one more. I think there's possibly one more after this. Is this, the first one was very graphic. It's very visual, and I think one of the things that was said earlier on was keep it visual. The second one, we got a little bit of visual, nice and simple, and then some takeouts on the right-hand side. Forget the presentation of it, right, with no infographic in there. Is this better? Yes for better, thumbs up at the back. A little bit more. No, still not good, or still can't tell the difference. I think still can't tell the difference got the most nods around the room.
Well, they haven't been warmed up enough yet, you know?
They've not been warmed up. Christina, you didn't warm them up. I said yesterday I was asked yesterday if I would do the orgasm on stage, the Harry Met Sally. I think Meg Ryan did it an awful lot better than I probably would, allegedly. But that's what we're faced with right now. So the challenge I would put to everybody in the room is provide your clients with actionable insights. What can they actually do with the information that you got? Because we're information rich and insight poor on the client side. And I think demand of your client that they be as open as possible with you and give you as much access to the data as they possibly can and tell you what is the problem that you want us to try and solve. And you're right. I don't know, Christina, if you made the comment earlier about most of the time the client doesn't actually know. And that's the truth. Sometimes we don't know what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think, again, if we've got a basic honesty and trust in the relationship, then we're able to do that. But for me, I think as a client, that's what I'm really looking for is the actionable insight. So if they could send out any message to the audience, it would be, that's really what we want. It's something that we can go and work with in future. So, thanks very much.
Yeah, and on that point about whether the client know or don't know, I think one point related to that is that actually don't be afraid to challenge the client, right? I mean, sometimes they do present a point of view because they think they know, but if you think you know something more than them, and a lot of times it's probably true, don't be afraid to challenge them just because they're the one who paid the bill, because I think that's sometimes what happened from the agency side because the client's paying the bill, whatever the client say, we're afraid to challenge them. So there are a lot of clients, I think they understand that better and better. So like for example, especially at Coke, we actually appreciate an agency coming that can challenge us in a respectful way and really have good evidence to support and back up their claim. So
my presentation was just given twice, so I think I'm good.
yeah, there you go. So our next speaker is Eileen Shield. She's the Executive Director of Corporate Communication with the Cleveland Clinic based in Cleveland, Ohio in the U.S. So
I went through that one yesterday. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good to be back again. I won't go through that yet, but I'm just going to jump right into, this is a picture of my CEO. His name is Dr. DeLoss Toby Cosgrove, and he's named after some remote island, so there's not a Greek background there. How many of you ever worked for a heart surgeon before? How many would you like to work for a heart surgeon? And on top of that, he's a dyslexic heart surgeon who can't read. He had C's and D's through high school, flunked out of college, didn't make it into medical school, and he's one of the world famous heart surgeons because he's a brilliant technician, but he doesn't like to read. And this is what he's like on a good day. We start our meetings in Cleveland about 6:30 a.m. Before these doctors go into the operating room. So it's a different world, and if you ask them what a business plan is, they look at you kind of funny. So we had our report, we're moving from more of a quantitative to a qualitative report, and we're trying to really get our arms around how do we talk to our stakeholders. I'm going to go back. So I don't just have one boss. I have institute chairmen. So we have a heart and vascular center, we have a cancer center, a children's hospital, a neurological institute, and it goes on and on. So these are very powerful doctors in high places that save lives every day, and they really like their media coverage. In addition to that, I work very closely with our board of directors, and we have about 65 trustees, 20 of whom are directors, and we work very closely. So what I'm trying to tell them is that, media isn't nice to have, it's necessary to have, and I have to help explain that. And I'm going to tell a little side story here, but recently I was asked to cut about 70% of my budget, and I said that would pretty much wipe out my whole team. We wouldn't have enough people to do crisis communication. We get about 600 media calls a week, and we were going through some serious looking at cost cutting because reimbursement in the United States for healthcare is drastically going down, and we're faced with financial challenges. However, I also indicated, because I had the data available to me, that public relations efforts are about 65% of the impressions and 3% of our costs, where on the advertising side it was 11% of the impressions and about 80% of the cost. So that's why data from you is so important to me. And the other thing is communicating effectively with our leadership is a challenge, and especially somebody who's very, very busy, has a short attention span, has very high expectations. So we came up with a one-page report for our CEO, and this is still in progress, and it kind of runs off the edge of the page, but we're trying to, he still likes the qualitative or the quantitative data, so we still provide that. And then if you look on the left-hand side below that, the qualitative, and we're starting to really target our messages, make sure we're delivering it to the right media with the right message to the right audience. And so this report is evolving, and where I need help is, do I have the right information in here, and am I using the information properly? One thing that we want is transparency and education. We want you to be forthright with us and tell us what you really know, because you have an area of expertise that we don't have. Help us align the goals, show us progress, talk about your process so we understand how you deliver things to us and how to make it easy. And I had to Google an algorithm the first time Dr. Rockland back there talked to me about it, because I didn't know what it was. So, we don't know your language, and I think it's important that you help educate us. Communicate, tell me what you think, advise me, engage me, be my partner. Give me options, but I need to be led. Help me decide what's best. I think a lot of this was already said, so give it to us straight. Don't tell us what we want to hear. I do want pushback. I do want to hear that my idea is crazy, but help me do it right. And I think counsel me. I 2 years ago, before we brought Ketchum on board, I had no interest. I was not being asked by our CEO to do anything beyond what we were already doing. We get great coverage. Volume was never our issue. We have 60,000 stories in the news every year. We get 600 calls a week. So it's not quantity, it's how do we develop quality, and how do we do that. Insight, I loved your comments, because I had to go through 3 or 4 case studies before I understood what an insight was. There's data, there's insights. What is an insight? Help us move the data to how it's going to help us. Lead the way. Be one step ahead of us. We want to know where to go next. How do we keep evolving? We're on a journey that's been going on for 2 years now, and I think we're just scratching the surface. We've accomplished a lot. So keep it simple. Help me learn. Partner with me, and help me reach my goals. That's all.
Thank you, Irene. Appreciate that. So our next speaker is Cindy Penters, who's Manager of External Communication at ING in Netherlands, right here.
My name is Cindy Penders. I'm the head of the External Communications Department at ING Netherlands. We work here in Amsterdam. We are a big bank in the Netherlands. Maybe in some other countries as well as where you live. But we have about 9 million clients in the Netherlands. So we're within the top 3 of Dutch banks. My team focuses on stakeholder management, PR, media relations, and social media. So that's our job within the bank. And our bank also is the proud sponsor of the Dutch national team. So if you're here tomorrow night and you're not doing anything, go to the Leidseplein, because it's going to be orange, one orange sea. Be part of it, because it's going to be great. And of course, we're going to win from Spain tomorrow. So that, well, I'm always an optimistic, so...
Any people from Spain in the room here?
You never know. We'll see tomorrow. Yeah. What we see now, and I think you all notice that, of course, we can measure how we are visible, what we see in traditional media and stuff, but a lot of things that are happening are not on the news. You don't see them on television. You don't see them. You don't read about them in the newspaper, but they are happening, and people are talking about it. Maybe on social media. So 99.99% is not on the news, but still happening. And how can you make sure you get all that information? Next week, we're going to publish a study which is about social media and PR. And we asked a lot of questions to journalists and to PR professionals. And some of the things that we saw was that 12% of the PR professionals are not even measuring social media impact at the moment, which I thought was really, well, I think very surprising to me that you're not even doing anything with it. And if you do it, make sure that you do both, that you still measure the traditional media coverage and you also measure the social media coverage. Because what we see is that there's a difference sometimes there. For us as a bank in the Netherlands, sentiment is a little bit more negative, I think, than for some other industries. But if you go to social media, you even see a little bit more negativity there in sentiment than in traditional media. Of course, use the social media. It can extend your reach, but are you reaching the right people? Are you really having an impact? And I think my colleagues here said on stage, the impact is what's important. What's the effect of what you're doing? And we are discussing this at our office as well. And we're talking about reputation as well. So not only the media and the social media, but stakeholders, but how can you measure reputation? And what influences this reputation? So this is something within the communication department which we discuss a lot. And we came up with this model, which you can only use for your communication department, because it's not simple enough to use for any other clients or any other stakeholder internally. But we said, if you look at what's doing to your reputation, you should look at your external stakeholders, but you also have to look at your internal stakeholders, because they should be your ambassadors. They are the people that are talking about your brand. So for reputation, for our department, this works. But never take this to your board, because this will not work for your board of directors. When you look at the reputation from an external point of view, looking at your clients and looking at your stakeholders, you see that you can do a lot with measurements. You can measure net promoter scores, you can measure brand preference among your clients. But for media, we work together with Publistat for the sentiment and for to show which themes are discussed. And we also work with RepTrack, which is the research that looks at, for example, which drivers are there for your reputation. For example, citizenship, workplace, leadership, performance of your company. And we measure that every quarter to have a look at if we see any changes there and if there's something we should do about it. And you cannot only do this in that right quarter, you have to do that as a company. If leadership is something you want to be better in, then of course your board has to be involved in this. This is the more complicated part of it, but there's also a simple part of it. our directors, our board wants an answer to a couple of questions. They want to know, what are people discussing? So what are stakeholders discussing? What's in the media? Which themes? Are you doing the right things as a communication department? So should we focus more or less on certain topics, certain themes? And of course, that also has some cost effectiveness in it. Is what you put in, is that, how is the output? What we see is this discussion. First, you want to have it simple, but you also want to be complete. You want to measure visibility, you want to show what visibility is like, but you also want to make some sort of business case, which is really difficult to make that business case for communication effectiveness. And I say this every time I discuss it internally: get rid of that advertising value. Simply get rid of it, because it's still being used and people still want it for their business case. But at this moment, since we are the head sponsor of the Dutch team, there's a lot of about football in the media and a lot about ING. Does that have the same value as an economic report that's also put out in the media? I don't have the answer, and it's a difficult question to answer, but it's still a discussion nowadays. And luckily, we internally have made our decision that we want to focus on impact, but still sometimes pops up. Engagement, that's what we want to focus on, because we are the most visible bank in Dutch media. We are the most discussed bank in the Dutch media. Not always good, I have to admit. Sometimes also, well, things we have to improve. But that's not our problem, visibility. Our problem is, can we make an impact? If your board asks you and you want to internally show what you're doing is the right thing or not the right thing, and what people are discussing externally, we came up with this. This normally is an email form with some text, a little bit of text in it, but I try to put it in a sheet. What we do is, first we focus on what we did in that quarter. What is it that we focused on as a communication department? To our in our PR activities, in our stakeholder management activities. So that's what we focus on first. I mean, I think it's all in Dutch, but you get the idea of that you first tell them this is what we focused on. Then the next step is what activities made sure we got a positive sentiment, and which ones got criticism. And we make top fives, very simple, because that's what people want. A top 3, a top 5. That's how we do it. And we focus on media and stakeholders, which is also, I think, Publistat has done a great job of integrating the stakeholder responses. So you have responses that stakeholders give towards the media are also measured. So we can see whether our regulator is talking about us positive or negative and what he's saying in the public domain. So that's for us also an extra in our measurement. And of course, the people that are in contact with those stakeholders use this information. They see, okay, this is supposed to be the topic that you want to discuss and that you are passionate about. So they use it again when they go to their stakeholders. Of course, we measure our visibility, but then again, not really a problem. Went up 48% in the first quarter, which had to do with some quotes about using big data in the Netherlands from one of our board members. That's why it went up so much. And we had a big internet banking disruption. Well, not the things that you really want, but so it doesn't really say anything that it's up 48%, because it's not what you want. So we do a benchmark. We look at other banks. How are they in the media? Better, worse, more, less? Which topics? Are there any topics that we consider very important for our bank that we should be leading in, but are not at the moment? Because another bank is leading that discussion. is an important step for us and something to look at. For social media, it's of course we measure sentiment, for example, but also are there any people that are really influencers? We focus more on the influencers, on how they are talking to us. And if we see something changing there, whether it's sentiment or themes they're discussing, we just approach them. Say, so come on, drink a cup of coffee with us. I'm looking at what you're saying, and I want to discuss this with you. This always works. So we use it for that as well. And we look at the things we should improve, of course. Things we're not that good at yet, but next quarter we want to improve. This we all put in an email. We send to our senior managers, we send to our board, other internal stakeholders. And what it does is, because it's so simple and it's easy for people to understand what it says here, we get a lot of feedback. Okay, I see now that mobile banking is really hot and people are discussing this and we get a lot of support for this. Focus more on that. That's the feedback we get. And sometimes an applause, which is also nice, that we did well. And if we see things that we should improve, we have a discussion with the people that are responsible for those teams or activities within the organization. So this is what we do. And I think within your company, if you have different internal stakeholders, make sure you do different things in your information and different communication forms. This is the one for us to use when there's people that want to know just the high level and not the details. The details, of course, we use, but I think this is the most simple one, and visibility always helps. So.
All right, so before I open up the floor for Q&A, as all of you can see, we see some general trends and themes here. So I'll let each of you think a little bit about the questions you want to ask. I have 3 questions, so I would like to see each of you just give very brief kind of comments. Because as I look through this and listen, first one is a one-pager always a necessity? Because we see in all of the examples, right? And the second is, can simple and complete coexist when it comes to reporting? And whether good or bad is always relative in this context. So each of you can start.
I think people are busy. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay, sorry. I just think people are really busy, and one page is what we try to really keep it to, and I think you can definitely accomplish both simple and complete.
Great. Good and bad?
What do you mean?
Is good and bad always relative?
Depends.
Depends. So it is relative, right? Rod, you wanted to answer?
No, I think I completely agree with the comment. I mean, I think one pager, if you've got 2 minutes in a monthly conference and you've got 2 minutes to discuss, social media, then this sort of thing, I mean, this is great. I've taken this away with me now. I'd love to be able to do something like this internally. Well, partly infographics are extremely difficult to do and do effectively, but I'd love to be able to do that. But I can just imagine the reaction I would get from presenting this to the CMO and him seeing something like this. There would be a WTF moment, I mean, to be honest. Sorry, but there really would be. But I think this is absolutely spot on. So is there a good and bad? I think this is really good. But I can imagine the reaction I would get would be fairly bad.
Yeah.
But then we should be changing.
Yeah, part of it is also educating, right, your audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Karen, you want to?
Yeah, Christina, horses for courses would be my answer. I think we somehow got a legacy of everything on one page from the pre-digital era, and doesn't have to be everything on one screen. So how is it consumed? Would sort of be my question to answer that. And I think, again, horses for courses is we're seeing more of a trend for what I'm calling pull-apart reports. Right? So there's so many different people internally who want so many different parts of it. And I think this is a great example of sort of showing us I've got a lot, and I've got to get out to a lot of people, but it's more about little pieces of information that have the biggest impact to the right person.
Yep. Cindy, you have anything to add?
Well, I think what we do is, of course, you have this one-pager infographic thing, but we also, the people in my team, for example, if you are responsible for the PR for our savings accounts, and what they do is they take this and then they go one step further to look at especially the savings sentiment and the savings activities. And then what they do is every quarter they do a small roadshow. They go to the department and do like a 3-4 pager and present it and then discuss it together and say, okay, what should we do next? What's next for next semester or next quarter? And so for a lot of people this will do, but if you want to get more from it, you have to go one step deeper.
Yeah. All right, so I want to open up for some questions before I close. Yeah, there's a question there.
Pawnee Joker, Cabinet Office. First of all, I'd like to thank the panel, what I thought was a very useful presentation. Just picking up on your question to the panel just now, and linking back to the presentation that my boss gave yesterday, Alex Akins from the Cabinet Office. He does the talking, I do the working. A lot of our visual performance hubs essentially has this in it. I'm not a huge fan of infographics because clearly what it does do, it marks the relative performance compared to previous months. So we try and go with charts, but we tend to try and keep it simple. The only comment I'll make looking at Cindy's chart is that we provide, given that we use charts in most cases, and a lot of our objectives are smart and would have baselines and targets, we provide the RAG status around it. So we report on it by exception as to what they're telling us. We also have a commentary box at the bottom where people can summarize what that is telling you, essentially, albeit in a few lines. I'd just like to, my second question is really directed at Cindy, really. I wasn't quite sure when you referred to the Reputation Institute and the fact that clearly as comms, we're an enabling function and our role is to enhance the reputation of the department. And as you know, reputation is forged based on experience, what people say about us and what we say about ourselves. And over at within the UK, we certainly track our reputation. In fact, I've been working with the Reputation Institute to create a bespoke model for government. And we provide that as an outcome measure in our dashboards, essentially, given that we know that although comms, we don't own reputation, we're a key driver of reputation. And we use the driver analysis to provide a meaningful insight that goes to the board, essentially, given that, as you know very well, Cindy, there are other dimensions like leadership, governance, and workforce, which clearly are the responsibilities of other areas of the business. So what we try and do is use, particularly where a lot of the comms activities around outputs, we use a lot of the information gleaned from performances around these outputs to provide interpretation to the results, but more importantly, suggest areas where the business ought to focus on.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you have a question for her?
Yes.
Or is there a
Sorry.
comment? Sorry,
It's
we're
from the
running out of
government.
time.
So
That's why
my
I
question
appreciate
really
your
is,
comment.
Christine, you said the reports, you don't send your outcome, your reputation tracker reports to the board. Why is that?
Now, we do send like a small version, and we discuss it in the board. But the model is difficult to use because, for example, we also measure the internal reputation. We've got, for example, how our people, our colleagues, think about ING, which is also an important component, which is also normally communicated internally. So there are a lot of things communicated internally, but somewhere they have to come together. And what we do as a communication department is see how they influence each other. So that's the part that I was trying to explain. But of course, the RepTrack results every quarter are also shared with the directors. Yeah.
Okay, I have time for one more brief question, and then I want to close with one thought. Yes.
Okay, so I mean, we all understand the benefit of aggregating data in infographics and everything, but and there needs to be lots of good data evidence behind that. Now, the question that I have to the panel, I mean, how deep does your commitment to evaluation data go when it comes to using data evidence to penetrate your business processes and actually making a difference beyond having great infographics for your chief executives?
Anyone?
I think the data is really important, and we do look at it. And I think we just try to put it in a format that's very simple. So I always go back to the data and look at some of the reports, and then we report out to each different institute chairman. So the Heart Center gets a different report. This is kind of, for us, a very high-level snapshot, but I think the data and the backup is important. I'm not sure I answered your question, but.
It's more a question that goes to what happens next. You know, all these presentations that we're hearing here is about how we do good evaluation.
So we adjust our strategy based on the data. So if we're not hitting our market, we are hitting our target.
Well, you're saying that this is a starting point, right, to show, and then that
we look at the data constantly and adjust our strategy based on where it's taking us, if it's going in the right place.
Well, great. Thank you all for your question. I do have one thought to close, as Barry asked me to talk about what might be the next steps for AMEC, and I saw that he has left the room. But I do see Davey Rockland, who's the current chair now, and Jeremy, who's the chair-elect, right, for AMEC. I think from this conversation, as we can see, we had the Barcelona principles about, 3-4 years ago. Maybe we can have a Amsterdam principle when it comes to keep it simple report, as we do see and hear some consistent patterns and the themes coming out of our panelists in terms of, for example, if we do think that one pager is important, well, what's the best information to put on that, right? And how present it, and give some best practice or best case examples as part of that, so the agency and the people can take with them and use that to modify for their report, as well as, you know, having a little bit more agreement in terms of what simple means, right? So, I mean, everyone can have a little bit understanding in terms of good or bad and what simple means. So, so I think that might be something, I think that will be something really good for AMEC to take, because the Barcelona principle is about measurement and have disciplined measurement approach. This one is once we've done the measurement and we have the results, now we're going to present it. So how do we get to the next step, right, to really demonstrate the value? So I think that would be something good to do. And thank you all very much for your time. Thank you, guys.